She's sitting across from her best friend at a coffee shop, stirring her drink without drinking it, trying to explain why she ended things with the man everyone in her life told her was the one. And the only thing she can come up with is, it just didn't feel right. He was wonderful. He was present. He was everything she thought she wanted. And somehow that wasn't enough. Her friend stares at her, doesn't say anything. Because what do you say to that? 6 months later, she's deep in something with a guy who forgets her birthday and makes her feel grateful when he texts back. And the man she left, the one who used to leave her notes in her jacket pocket, is now a thought she can't stop returning to at the worst possible hours. At Brutal Relationship, we go where most relationship channels won't, straight into the uncomfortable psychology underneath the surface patterns that quietly run people's love lives without them ever realizing it. No fluff, no easy answers, just the truth laid out plainly. Now let's get into it, because what's underneath this pattern is more specific and more fixable than most people realize. Imagine a woman named Serena, late 20s, emotionally intelligent, someone who prides herself on self-awareness. Her partner Joel is what you'd call a complete human being. He communicates, he shows up, he remembers the things she mentioned once in a passing conversation and brings them back up weeks later because he was actually listening. He doesn't manufacture conflict. He doesn't keep score. He just loves her, steadily, quietly, without needing applause for it. And Serena feels suffocated by it, not because Joel is doing anything wrong, but because something inside her keeps searching for a problem that isn't there. She finds herself analyzing the relationship constantly, looking for cracks that don't exist, convincing herself that the absence of turbulence must mean the absence of depth. She breaks up with him on a Tuesday, evening, calm and certain, tells him the connection isn't what she needs it to be. Joel thanks her for being honest, leaves without making it ugly. 13 months later, Serena is lying on her couch trying to figure out why a man who shows genuine interest in her makes her feel almost nothing, while Joel, stable, consistent, emotionally present Joel, has become this persistent ache she cannot locate a reason for. That ache has a reason, and it's not random. It's rooted in specific psychological mechanics that almost nobody explains clearly. Why your brain punishes you for choosing? Well, start here because this is foundational to everything else. The human brain is not a gratitude machine. It was never built to sit still and appreciate what's good and stable. It was built to scan, detect, anticipate, and respond to change. That's how the species survived, by staying alert to what was uncertain, not by savoring what was guaranteed. In practical terms, this means your brain generates its strongest neurochemical responses to things that are unpredictable, not things that are good. Unpredictable. Every time something uncertain resolves in your favor, a message back from someone who's been quiet, a moment of warmth from someone who runs cold, your brain releases dopamine, not because the outcome was meaningful, because the uncertainty resolved. Now, take someone like Joel. He's warm on Monday. He's warm on Thursday. He texts back consistently. He never leaves Serena wondering where she stands. And her brain, being the reward-seeking system it is, gradually stops registering him as a source of stimulation. He moves from the exciting category to the reliable category. And reliable things don't produce the same internal charge. This is hedonic adaptation, the psychological term for the human tendency to emotionally normalize positive experiences over time. It's the same reason a raise at work feels incredible for 3 weeks and then just becomes your salary. The circumstance didn't change. The nervous system adapted. The painful irony is that the very qualities that make Joel a genuinely healthy partner, his consistency, his availability, his emotional steadiness, are precisely the qualities that trigger adaptation fastest. His goodness becomes his camouflage. Now contrast that with someone unpredictable, someone who's electric one weekend and unreachable the next. Every warm moment with them comes loaded with prior uncertainty, which means the relief registers as reward. The brain logs it as passion. The body logs it as chemistry. But what's actually happening is a stress cycle that mimics attraction closely enough to fool almost everyone. What do you actually do with this awareness? If you're the steady partner in this equation, the answer isn't to start pulling away or engineering emotional distance. That's a short-term trick that costs you your character. The real answer is recognizing that consistency and predictability are not the same quality. You can be completely trustworthy and still be someone your partner hasn't fully figured out. Show the parts of yourself you normally keep internal. Introduce experiences that neither of you has a map for. Stay in motion as a person. Keep growing, keep changing, keep becoming. Being known fully is beautiful. Being completely figured out is where aliveness quietly exits a relationship. The template that was written before you had a choice. Now, go a layer deeper because the hedonic adaptation piece only explains part of this. Underneath the neurochemistry is something more personal, a subconscious model of what love is supposed to register as in the body. Not what you believe love should look like when you write it out logically. What your nervous system actually recognizes as love when it walks in the door. That model wasn't built by you. It was built for you during childhood, by watching the first relationships you ever had access to. If the love in your early environment was consistent and warm, your nervous system built a blueprint around warmth and consistency. If the love you grew up around was unpredictable, sometimes present and engaged, sometimes distant and unavailable, sometimes confusing in ways you couldn't articulate as a child, then your nervous system built a blueprint around that texture instead. And here is the part that matters enormously. That blueprint doesn't update just because you get older. It travels into every adult relationship you enter, operating in the background, filtering your experience. The question it's constantly running is not, is this person good for me? It's, does this feel like what I learned love feels like? When someone emotionally unavailable walks in, someone who runs warm and cold, who keeps you slightly uncertain, who creates that particular tension your nervous system learned to associate with closeness. It recognizes them, not consciously, instinctively, and it registers that recognition as chemistry. When someone genuinely secure walks in, someone like Joel, calm and available and honest, the blueprint looks at them and finds no match, no familiar tension, no recognizable pull, and it files them under comfortable but not quite right. Not because they aren't right, because they don't match the old template. Psychologists studying adult attachment patterns have documented this extensively. People who carry anxious attachment styles, built from unpredictable early environments, frequently experience emotional security as underwhelming and emotional volatility as magnetic. Not because they enjoy suffering, because volatility is what their internal map has always recognized as love's signature. Absorb that for a moment. A man can be doing everything correctly, genuinely, sincerely, completely correctly, and still fail to register as someone worth staying for, not because of who he is, but because of what she hasn't yet examined inside herself. He's not the problem. An unexamined blueprint is the problem, and unexamined blueprints run the show indefinitely. The practical application. If you keep finding yourself bored by people who treat you well, and energized by people who keep you guessing, the honest work isn't trying harder to feel what you think you should feel. It's asking where you learned that uncertainty was part of love's texture in the first place. That question, taken seriously, changes the entire trajectory, the specific shape of what gets lost. Now, we reach the part of this conversation that's the hardest to put into words. Why the regret, when it finally arrives, doesn't feel like ordinary sadness. Why it has this particular quality that women who've been through it describe as something closer to grief than heartbreak. When Serena was with Joel, she wasn't just in a functioning relationship, she was in a space where she didn't have to manage herself carefully, where she could say the things she was ashamed of, show up on a bad day without performing okayness, admit to being uncertain or afraid without calculating what it would cost her. That kind of emotional environment is genuinely uncommon, and while you're inside it, it tends to feel unremarkable. It doesn't announce itself as rare, it just feels calm. What Serena didn't realize until afterward is how much energy she normally spent editing herself in relationships, softening things, anticipating reactions, managing the temperature of situations. With Joel, she didn't do that. And when she left, she lost not just him, but access to the version of herself that existed in that freedom. The one who was just honest. unguarded, not performing a more palatable version of her own life. That loss doesn't have an obvious name. It's not heartbreak in the traditional sense. It's something closer to losing a room inside yourself that only opened when someone else was safe enough to open it. And you don't realize how much you needed that room until you're somewhere cold and the door won't unlock. Then the contrast effect arrives and makes everything sharper. The contrast effect is the psychological principle that we evaluate experiences not in isolation, but relative to what surrounds them. Joel felt ordinary when he was consistent and present every day. He becomes extraordinary in her perception when she's with someone who treats reliability like an inconvenience. The new relationship delivers stimulation, real stimulation. The uncertainty is genuine. The intensity is real. But intensity and depth are not interchangeable, and this is a distinction that only reveals itself after the intensity fades. What's left underneath, when you strip away the novelty, is often two people who activated each other frequently, but never actually built anything with the time they spent together. That's the 2 a.m. moment. That's why she's in her car in a parking lot with nowhere particular to go. What's the real move if you're inside that regret right now? Not self-punishment. Guilt performs the function of accountability without actually producing any of its results. It makes you feel like you're doing something without changing anything. The actual work is asking the honest question underneath. What specifically was I running from? And have I been willing to sit with that clearly yet? Because the pattern doesn't dissolve through remorse. It dissolves through genuine understanding of its own mechanics. The honest blind spot. Good men carry. Here's the turn in this conversation that almost never happens, because it's easier to frame this entirely as a woman's pattern. But there's something important on the other side. Being a genuinely good partner is not a complete relationship strategy. A real number of men have quietly absorbed the belief that consistency plus kindness plus emotional availability equals lasting attraction. That being good is the formula, and the formula is sufficient. But there's a meaningful gap between being good and being someone your partner experiences as fully alive. And a lot of genuinely good men fall into that gap without ever realizing it. There's a distinction worth naming here. A man who is patient because nothing has tested him reads differently than a man who has moved through something genuinely hard and chosen patience as a response to that experience. One comes across as a factory setting. The other reads as developed character, and people register that difference in their gut well before they can identify it with words. There's also something specific that happens gradually when a man makes the relationship his entire emotional world. He stops investing in his own growth. Friendships go quiet. Independent interests get shelved. His inner landscape slowly reorients entirely around his partner's experience, her moods, her needs, her responses to him. He means well, but what he creates without meaning to is a dynamic where his partner can never actually miss him. And missing someone, that real ache of their temporary absence, is one of the quiet engines that sustains desire over time. When a man is entirely available, entirely oriented toward his partner, there's no gap in which she gets to want him back. Desire renews itself in space. Remove all the space, and what remains can start to feel more like a presence than a person. The actual correction isn't playing games or engineering scarcity. It's returning to who you were before the relationship became the organizing principle of your entire life. The goals you deferred, the friendships you let atrophy, the skills you stopped building. Reinvest in those things, not as a strategy to seem less available, but because your wholeness is not something that should be conditional on a relationship going well. A man who has a full life brings something genuinely different to a partnership than a man whose life is the partnership. The place where the pattern, finally, stops repeating. Here's where I want to land this, because most conversations about this topic stop one step short of where they actually need to go. The reason this cycle repeats, Serena leaves Joel, feels the weight of it later, and potentially makes the same choice again with someone new, isn't because she's incapable of choosing well. It's because understanding a pattern in retrospect is completely different from interrupting it while it's actively running, and most people never bridge that gap. You can understand attachment theory perfectly on an intellectual level, and still feel the magnetic pull towards someone destabilizing in real time, because that pull doesn't originate in the thinking brain. It comes from somewhere older and faster. The blueprint we talked about earlier doesn't live in your prefrontal cortex where logic happens. It lives somewhere more instinctive than that, and knowledge alone doesn't reach it. What actually reaches it is repeated practice of a very specific skill, pausing in the actual moment of the pull, not afterward in reflection, not in a therapist's office 2 weeks later, and asking, right then, whether what you're feeling is genuine connection or anxiety wearing the costume of chemistry. Those two experiences are nearly identical at the surface. Same physical sensations, same heightened awareness, same pull toward the source. Distinguishing them takes practice in real conditions, not just understanding in calm ones. That gap between knowing and doing is where the cycle either breaks or continues, and closing it is genuinely the work, not reading more about it, not understanding it more thoroughly. Actually pausing in the real moment and making a different inquiry than the one your nervous system is used to making. And for anyone watching this who is currently in Joel's position, steady, present, giving everything, watching someone look past all of it towards something that will ultimately cost them, won't close that gap. More patience won't close that gap. More patience won't either. When someone is running an old pattern, your effort doesn't register as love. It registers as guaranteed. And as we established at the very start of this, the brain stops generating reward signals for things it has filed under guaranteed. The real move, the one that requires the most honest self-respect, is to remain fully yourself without making their recognition of your worth the condition for your own sense of it. To love genuinely without losing yourself inside the loving. To hold a standard not because it's tactical, but because your own integrity isn't something you negotiate away based on how someone else is responding to you. Serena and Joel's story lands somewhere true when both of them carry forward what the experience actually taught them. When Serena stops, long enough to examine why calm felt like absence, and why tension felt like proof of something real. When Joel understands that his character was never the variable, the timing was wrong, the readiness was wrong, but the man himself was exactly what he appeared to be. And that matters, because genuinely good men who know their own value, who don't collapse inward when someone doesn't see them clearly, are not common. They are worth becoming, and they are worth recognizing before the recognition comes too late. That's the whole point of sitting with this, honestly. Not to punish yourself for the past, not to decode someone else's choices and find a way to feel superior about them, but to get clear enough in yourself that the next time something real is standing right in front of you, you see it while it's there, and you choose it with full awareness of what you're holding. That's how the cycle ends, not with regret, with recognition that finally arrives on time.